Hello, everyone. I am LaKisha C. Brooks, your diversity architect, and welcome to another episode of the Leadership Loft, where we share unfiltered stories of leadership in all forms, from the good to the bad. We focus on stories of leadership in the areas of sports, business, education, politics, and beyond. And today I want to share two stories that focus on women of color. And when I typically do my diversity work, I focus on it from a holistic, operational, business perspective. And today I'm going to take that hat off just a little bit. And I want to focus on the human side of diversity. When we focus on the people side of diversity, the first story that I want to talk about is Vice President Harris. And this is not about whether or not you are going to vote for her or you're going to vote for Donald Trump or any other person on the ballot. It's not about the political affiliation. It's about the treatment that we're seeing of Vice President Harris. That's what we want to talk about today. I shared on a recent LinkedIn post in other areas that when President Obama ran for office, he faced a lot of racial discrimination, racial attacks. When Hillary Clinton ran for president, she faced gender discrimination and gender attacks. Can you imagine having to face both racial attacks and attacks on your gender? That is what Vice President Harris has to deal with every single day during this campaign, and what she's already faced since it's been announced that she will now be on the ticket as a presidential candidate. I have heard things, and I want to just make sure that I don't misquote when I do this. So let me pull this up here. I have heard so many nasty things that have been said about Vice President Harris, everything. And let me just tell you this, one of the nicest things that I've heard is she's a DEI hire. Can you imagine that being one of the nicest things that you heard about yourself? I've heard terms such as Jezebel, side chick, the original Hawk 2 girl. I've heard all types of nasty, vile comments towards her. She's not qualified for the role. All these things that we're hearing about her. I've even so much have heard people talk about her being childless. And that's another area of her life that now is being attacked. So can you imagine adding that layer to it as well? That's something that neither President Obama nor Hillary Clinton had to face because they both are parents. This now leads me to talk about something called intersectionality. And in the space of intersectionality, which was introduced to us by Kimberly Crenshaw, it talks about the different areas that identify us that can show double discrimination, in some case triple, or other areas of discrimination. She talked about it when she focused on the intersections of Black women. And that's what we're seeing here with Vice President Harris. So she did not just face the racial attacks with being a person of color, South Asian, and a Black American. She also faces the scrutiny of being a woman and a childless woman at that. And I too am a childless woman, so I definitely can resonate with that. And I'm also a woman and I'm also a person of color. So when I see the attacks, of course, if you are someone who identifies with any of those intersections, you find yourself feeling the same things as well. So again, it's not about political affiliation. It's about the humanity side of things. We're even seeing some Republicans calling for some of these attacks to stop attacking based on race. Let's get to the facts. Let's really focus on that. But to call her unqualified with the track record that she does have and the experience that she has had throughout her career from the late 80s to early 90s to where we are now. To say she's not qualified is another attack, if you will, on women, and especially women of color who face this every single day in the workplace, who are told that we are not qualified enough when we get to a certain level. So we are good enough to be at a certain level in an organization, but when it comes to maybe C suites, if you will, and in this case, the highest position in our country, we are now not qualified for it. We are now seen as a DEI hire. Again, as we all know, I work in this DEI space. There's nothing more insulting when it comes to a position than being told that you're hired simply because of what you look like. I am only getting the role because I'm a DEI hire. That is what people may say. It is, quite frankly, completely, in a lot of cases, untrue, because you've earned that right. You put in the time and the effort, the experience, the results speak for themselves, that you are qualified in itself. But then being told that because of what you look like, that's the only reason you have that position. Can you imagine being told that after all the work that you put into your craft, that that's what you're being told? So again, this is not about who you want to vote for, because I'm not here to sway anybody to vote for anyone. I want everyone to do their own research and due diligence as to who they want to vote for. If it's these two, it could be someone else on the ballot that you want to vote for. But let's make sure that we stick to things that are important to us and not focus on things such as a DEI hire, or I've seen things, and I'm going to read a quote here. When you go down that route, you take mediocrity. And that's what they have done right now. That's a quote that we've seen. I've also seen things, and I want to read another one here. Harris was going to be the nominee because she's female and her skin color is the correct DEI color. Again, we're not reading anywhere in here. And if you don't think she's qualified, that's okay. But let's talk about the facts of why she's not qualified from the results, not simply from what she looks like. That's not fair. So it goes back to what I've shared on LinkedIn and other areas about removing the E from SHRM's work. This is why that E is very important to keep in place. Now, again, as I mentioned before, in their defense, they did say that they was going to be part of a bigger strategy when it comes to inclusion, and it's going to be part of that. But this is why the E is so important, because it has to be a fair and equitable process. Because if you don't have that, we run into situations like this. How can she feel included if it's not fair from the start? You're being told that you're not good enough, you're not qualified already out the gate. It has nothing to do with my track record of my performance. It simply has to do with what I look like. So again, that's why I say when we are looking at the EIB, ultimately we want people to get to the B where they feel like they can be themselves, where they feel they can be authentic. But if you're missing some of those areas to get there, it's going to be a hard road. And what also bothers me is when I see other people that could be facing the same thing as a woman or woman of color, as someone who may be childless or things like that, who post things out of joke. You know, I was on Facebook and I saw someone that posted a photo of Vice President Harris with the television host Montel Williams. And because I'm assuming they dated years ago, which again, I have no idea what that has to do with the fact of running for an office. Everyone has dated, everyone has a past. But when I saw this young lady post it and did it as a joke to say, and I think she said, let's talk about this code switching. And of course, I'm understanding what code switching is. Says, well, for one, this is not an example of code switching. you're posting a photo of someone that she dated or whatnot years ago. According to my tale, it was like 20 plus years ago. What does that have to do with code switching? Oh, it's a joke. And I said, what she's facing right now is beyond what's a joke. It's something that's, and this is what I said to the person, you and I may face every day in the workplace, and other women that look like us or women in general are facing every day when we're told we're not good enough. So why should we make a mockery and a joke of it? Because we think it's funny. It's not funny because she says, "Oh, well, she's a politician, so it's okay." It's not okay because what Vice President Harris is facing is a reflection of what many women face every single day in the workplace, every single day. And you have to go in there with your head held high and continue to do your job effectively while you're hearing all these things. Hey, Susie shouldn't get that position because X, Y, and Z, or Susie only got that position because Susie's a woman. We hear that. And even when we talk about the case of being childless, sometimes we see it as a disadvantage because then, for those that really feel as though women shouldn't have rights to or decisions to not have kids or not understand that some women may have fertility issues, there's also the side of it where women are also, things are held against them when they do have kids. And now you have the question of, is she committed to her job as well? So it's extremely difficult, and a lot of things that we face as women in the workplace, and especially women of color, when we're in these positions to try to move up in this as well. Now, luckily for Vice President Harris, she has a lot of allies that are behind her. She's taking the high road to do this. She's focusing on what's important to us as people. So again, and I keep saying this because I want people to understand, it's not about who you vote for. It's about doing this the right way, making sure that it's fair and equitable, making sure that we're focusing on honestly what's important. Is it really important whether or not Donald Trump's a man or Vice President Harris is a woman? Or is it really important about what we need to know who's the best candidate or the best party or whatever it is that you focus on? Isn't that what's most important as well? And quite frankly, all this stuff is just noise and not important as well. But again, I want us to understand that this is the reflection of what a lot of women are facing. And so, what can we do about this is the question. Because if we see Vice President Harris dealing with this in the public eye, I may add, what do you think happens behind closed doors? So we have to start to think about, what can we do as individuals to alleviate this type of stuff? What individual responsibility do I have to ensure that when we're looking at a job, that we're focusing on what's important? We hear a lot of things about people want to get positions based on merit. Well, that's what we're doing. We can't say that we want things based on merit, but then we throw out the fact that somebody is only in that position because of their race or gender or whatever it is. Let's all come to the table with our resumes. Let's all come to the table with our uh, proof of work, everything we've done, and let's really vie for these positions. Again, whether it's the president of the United States or a leadership role within the organization. So we can't say that we want to just focus on merit and skills and those type of things, but then we also turn around and say things that make it muddy when we try to go for those positions as well. That's very important to do as well. So I was very passionate about that because, again, as a woman of color, um, I've experienced some of this. As a woman in general, I experienced this. I remember working for an organization, and myself and a young man, we were relatively around the same age. And I think the organization, one of the leaders asked what was our plans for the next 5 years. And we both responded similarly about wanting to have a family, having kids. And the response that he got was different than mine. The response that I got back was, "Oh, do we need to plan for you to have a family, or do you plan on taking off for that? Or what does that look like for the organization?" Versus the guy, it was like, "Yay, congratulations, that's awesome." So even in those contacts, we're just like, okay, we literally want to do the same thing as part of our 5-year plan on our personal side, but you're only concerned about it on the professional side with me as a woman versus him as a male. So again, this is something that we're seeing a lot and something that I hope that we can alleviate, hopefully eradicate over time, that it can really be about skills and things like that. But again, this is why equity is important, and then why it's important to cast a wider net when we talk about recruiting, so that we are getting the best qualified people from all groups of folks. That's why the E is very important. So I want to switch gears and talk about a story that, quite frankly, made me really, really sad and mad and a lot of different emotions at the same time. So there's a story about Sonya Massey, a young Black woman who was shot and killed in her home. And I know we've heard a lot of stories about people being murdered by the police. And some reason this story really struck a chord with me. I started crying, as a matter of fact. And I watched the video, and it was extremely hard to watch and sit through. So again, if you haven't seen that, we do have the video. I'm not going to show it out of respect for her family and friends and other loved ones, and of course anybody that's interested in seeing the video. Of course, it's a simple Google search, or it's on your local news stations and things like that. I just chose not to show the video. In the video, some of the things that really bothered me is just the fact of calling the police to feel protected in the first place. This young woman was home by herself, and I'm someone who has lived by myself. And you think you hear someone outside, you're not sure of what's going on. So what do? You mean you're a woman by yourself? She was a relatively small woman from what we saw in the video, and you're like, "Hey, well, what's going on?" And you call the police for help, and you are then spoken to in a condescending manner. If I recall correctly, I remember the police asking something about her mental state, and whether or not she may or may not, when you talk about mental state, um, had that. Remember that we're talking about a woman who thinks someone is outside of her home. How do you think that they're going to react or feel? They're going to seem a little nervous, a little flustered. I know I would be if I'm by myself. I mean, I have a dog, but she's like 17 pounds. I mean, she's not going to protect anything. I would feel the same way. And then I'm being spoken to in such a way that makes me feel as though am I crazy? Was somebody really here? And to be gaslit by the very people that are supposed to protect you. That started me to get very upset and sad and angry. And again, all these emotions that I was feeling at the same time. And then we fast forward to inside of the house. And I don't really quite understand because I didn't see how it went from the outside to the inside, but I'm sure there's some footage out there. And she then has the water on the stove, and she's instructed, "Hey, we don't want to burn the house down," or something to that effect. Turn the water off, or turn the stove off, or whatever it may have been. And she goes to do that. She then subsequently tries to take it to pour it out. That's what it looks like. We don't know for sure. And they back up, and she's like, "Oh, why are you backing up?" And they say, "Hey, we don't want to get the hot water on us." And then she mentioned, "I rebuke you in the name of Jesus." I think she said it twice. And the officer then says, "I will shoot you. I will effing shoot you in your effing face." Could you imagine how terrified she must have been to be told that by the very people that she called to help her because she thinks someone's outside of her house? And she then drops down, drops the pot, because they said, drop the pot a few times to her. And that's when she said, "I rebuke you in the name of Jesus." She says, "I'm sorry. And I think that's the part that broke my heart more than anything. She yells, "I'm sorry," because in that moment, I think she realized, I don't know what's going to happen here in that moment. And can you imagine you say, "I'm sorry." You're like, "Oh, you drop to your knees or drop down to protect yourself." And you then have shots aimed at you. And what's scary is when someone tells you, "I will shoot you in your face," and they do it. That's really, really, really scary to experience. And if that wasn't enough, after the fact, the behavior was also inhumane. To not want to get help for her, to say the things like, "Oh, she's gone. There's nothing, there's no need to waste supplies or materials or whatnot." And again, I'm paraphrasing all of this. To not have any regard to her life as a mother, as a person, to treat her as if she's just a dog that you just shot. And even then, I have a dog. I couldn't imagine that. It was very heartbreaking and frustrating, to say the least. And again, I don't care what racial background, political background, or any of that you come from. If you don't feel something when you watch that, that's something that we need to look inside ourselves with. If we don't feel some sort of, whether it's anger, sadness, disbelief, empathy for her family and kids, there should be something that you feel when you watch that. And you can't even use the excuse of, "Oh, well, she was not complying or she was rude or whatever," because it never happened. She was never a threat. She was simply trying to get help. That's literally what she was doing. And she took the pot off the stove and turned it off. And she's trying to put the water in there. And if someone feels threatened by, "I rebuke you in the name of Jesus," then we have some bigger issues we need to discuss. Even if you don't believe in God, even if you aren't religious or whatever it is, there's no reason that you should be triggered by that unless you just have it in your heart. It's just who you are as a person to respond that way, to treat people that way. That's just who you are. And I have some information here from NBC News that spoke to the work history of Sean Grayson. That is the officer in custody right now for this shooting. And it says here, and again, I want to make sure that I'm getting this correct, that in his job application, he disclosed that he abused alcohol and he's been intoxicated. And it's quoted a lot in his life, a lot. And we've heard about a number of arrests, DUI, and things like that as well. We've also learned from this NBC News that there were other complaints about his behavior. And also, it's been recorded and that he has had 6 jobs in the last 4 years. And I understand that people job hop. However, when we talk about the other things that have happened and you couple that with some of the complaints, it's not simply just job hopping at that point. Of course, there's more investigation that needs to be done in this case. So, but these are the records and the information that was pulled from NBC News that talked about this. And it makes me think, what could have been done and in the hiring process, right? That could have eliminate this person. At some point, we do background checks on people. At least I would think so in a police department, right? We do psychological tests. I mean, there's a lot of things we do to question why this person even had this position. And I've heard some people say, "Hey, we got to do a better job with training and development." Of course, if you know anything about my background, L&D is a strong part of what I do. I also focus on training for change. Even if in our diversity architecture framework, our focus is training for change. In this case, what was training going to do? Were you going to change to make him be a better person, to not have hate in his heart, to be less condescending, to be less abusive? What are we training to change? Because I'm pretty sure, again, I don't have the records, but I'm pretty sure there was training on how to de-escalate something. But from what I saw, there was nothing to de-escalate because there were no incidents that we saw from Ms. Massey to de-escalate. So even if it was, you were taught to do that, right? You're taught to learn how to communicate. He spoke to her in a very condescending moment before he went into her house. So again, was training really going to help in this particular case? Because they, of course, were training for skills. Police department, you're teaching them how to properly shoot or taser or things like that, right? But you also teach those soft skills, how to communicate as well, how to de-escalate, how to have rapport, how to build trust, all those things, those intangible things. But how do you teach to not have hate in your heart? I don't know if there's a training for that. If there is, please let me know, because this seemed more about hate in your heart and less about the soft skills. When you come into a situation and you already are condescending, you seem as though you don't want to be there. You don't want to be bothered by her. She's irritating you. You don't like her, whatever it is. When you come on the scene like that, what is it that we're supposed to be training for? At that point, we have to look at, was this person the right culture add for our organization? That should have been done in the screening process as well. And also looking at the history of this person. And I'm going to read this here, while he was working for Logan County, he was also accused in separate complaints of leaving a woman feeling violated during an arrest and of harassing her fiance during a jail visit. That shows character flaws right there. Those are already questionable, how he's treating other people. And as a police officer, my daddy was a military police. On any level of being a police officer, military, or if you're local or state police or whatever it is, you're supposed to care about others. You're supposed to do what's best for other people. But if you're driving drunk, you're already showing that you have a lack of judgment. Your judgment ability is not there because you don't care about other people, because you're putting other people's lives at risk. So again, we have to go back to our screening process. Forget the training. What about the screening of this person being here in the first place? This is what we need to focus on. Are we doing a better job screening our applicants? Or are we so desperate to get warm bodies, that we're going to hire somebody who has a questionable past? Perhaps Mr. Grayson could have found employment in something else. But perhaps carrying a gun when you are already accused of harassing people and you have DUIs and all these other character flaws, maybe being a police officer probably wasn't the best solution. So again, we have to really think about how we treat people. This whole show today is about humanity, how we treat people. And the focus today, yes, we're two women of color. And normally, like I said, I don't focus a lot on people side of diversity as a one area. I focus on it as a operational focus, while people are part of that. But today I had to literally switch the hat today and just focus on people while talking about operations. So it was a little backwards this time. We led with people and then talked about how the people help the operations when we talk about recruiting and screening and all the things that we have set in place for our organization. So hopefully this episode today, even if it makes you say, hey, let me think differently, let me focus differently, let me look within myself and see what I am accountable for doing, because each and every single one of us are only accountable for ourselves and the actions that we take and what we do and how we respond. We are only responsible for what we do. So we first have to start with self and then try to be a better ally and a better person. So none of what we talked about today has anything to do with who you're going to vote for or what political affiliation you are, um, again, affiliated with. It doesn't matter. It's really about the people side of stuff as well. So we have to do better to be better. So I want to thank you all for listening to this episode of the Leadership Loft. I am your host, LaKisha C. Brooks, your diversity architect. Continue to strive for excellence, continue to challenge yourself, be well, and be a change agent. Thank you so much.